This is a training session on attention and listening skills in the early years. The first thing we're going to think about in terms of attention and listening is to think about what helps us to listen. And I'm going to talk through a few things that are common answers when we ask this question. The first one is when there are no distractions. And when we're thinking about distractions, there's usually three things that we need to think about. One is the noise distractions. So that can be big noises that distract us. Maybe there's a high level of noise in the room, or there's a big noise that happens outside. Maybe something's driving past, or like an ambulance goes past and we want to go and look and see what's happening, or a fire engine, or there's something big noisy thing outside. But sometimes it's a noise distraction that's just a low level of noise that just kind of gets you and irritates you, and you can't quite cut it out of your you can't quite distract yourself from it, and you just have to kind of see what it is, and it just irritates. The other the other distraction is kind of visual distractions. So a visual distraction can often be your phone. I mean, that can be a sound distraction, but sometimes you can turn the sound off and it's still there as a visual distraction. You might be trying to watch this video and you might have your phone next to you and messages are pinging up and you kind of have to look at it. But other visual distractions are if you go on a course and you're sitting and people are in front of you and you're distracted by, maybe what the people are wearing, or maybe what the lecturer is wearing, or maybe the displays on the wall, and you want to maybe kind of find out about different posters and it's distracting. And the other distractions are internal distractions. And by internal distractions, we mean by the things that are going on inside your mind. So maybe you're just not in a place that you're ready to listen. So you're thinking about what's happened in the morning. You're thinking about what you need to do when you get home. You haven't kind of parked all the things that's gone on for you in your mind. You're maybe thinking, oh, I meant to get something out for dinner and I forgot. And can I surreptitiously text somebody to kind of text my partner to say, can you swing by Tesco to get something for tea because I haven't forgotten to get the dinner out, or all of those things that are internal distractions. And what links in with internal distractions is that idea of being comfortable, because maybe you're hungry, maybe you're thirsty, maybe you're dying to go to the loo, so you've got all that on your mind and you're thinking you're not comfortable. But equally, are you comfortable in how you're sitting? Do you want to move around? Are the seats really uncomfortable? Do you normally sit in a particular way, or do you prefer to lie? Do you prefer to slouch? Do you prop yourself up? All of those things about being comfortable in the right place and the right space to listen. Whether it's an interesting topic, are you are you watching this video because you were told to? Are you watching it because it's interesting and you want to find out more about attention and listening? Is it something that really inspires you? Is this something is it a topic that you think, wow, I really want to hear about this? It's something that I want to find out more about. Um, are you prepared to listen? Are you like, oh, I know that this is going to take this amount of time. I've set myself space to do this. I've come into a space where I can do it. I know that I'm going to be listening for this amount of time. If you were told you were going to a course and it's going to last an hour and it's going to finish at 3 o'clock, and then at 3 o'clock it keeps on and on and on, and you're like, it gets to 3 and you're like, when is this going to finish? And you're probably not listening because you're not thinking about that, or somebody suddenly springs something onto you and says, right, we're doing this now, and you hadn't thought you were, you thought it was a different day or something. You're really not in the right frame of mind to listen, so you're not prepared to do that at that time. And the other thing is that an animated presenter often comes up as a question to this about what helps to listen. So somebody having an interesting voice, somebody having good eye contact, body language, being able to, not talking in a monotone, but also the way it's presented. Is there visuals? Is there things to look at? Is it just somebody talking? Is if it's PowerPoint, is are they just reading the same thing off the PowerPoint? And could I have just done that anyway? All of those things. Is there added value in what I'm listening to? So all of those things help us to listen. So we've had to think about the things that impact on our own listening and attention. And now we're going to have a think about for children's listening and attention. And it's no surprise that all of the things that impact on our own attention and listening impact on children's listening and attention too. And we're going to look at those things and think about ways that we can support children's listening and attention. But the other thing that we need to think about is that listening and attention is a developmental skill. And what we mean by that is that it develops over time. So we don't expect young children to have good listening and attention skills. We're expecting them to flit from one activity to another. We're not expecting them to sit for a long amount of time. If we look at the Highland developmental overviews and have a look at some of the skills that it says in there that we could relate to listening and attention. So remembering that the developmental overviews are what we would expect typically most children to achieve by the end of their nursery year. So the 2-year-old one that most 2-year-olds would have at the end of that nursery 2 year, the 3-year-old at the end of the nursery 3 year, and the 4-year-old at the end of that nursery 4 year. So not at the beginning, at the end. If we look at the 2 and the 3-year-old one, it talks about so at the 2-year-old one, it talks about a child will sit and listen to a simple storybook with pictures. And there's some clues there about strategies that will help. So looking at, there's some pictures there, and it's a simple storybook and it has pictures in it. So there's some things that will, automatically support listening and attention. The 3-year-old one, there's some more clues in there about some things that will help, because it says that in a small group, so that's a small group, that they will listen and attend again to a simple story with pictures. And that's something that we would be looking for at the end of the nursery 3 year. And in the 4-year-old developmental overview, what it says is that they will listen and appropriately join in talk about something, a current activity, so something that's just happening in front of them, with adults and other children. And so in order to do that, they need to have that listening and attention to kind of just be able to see what's going on and just talk about what's happening there and then. And it says that they will follow a spoken instruction without having to stop and look at the speaker. So that means that they can kind of attend to what's happening and they can be playing, really focused on what they're playing, but they can also listen to what mum and dad's saying or what the nursery teacher's saying and hear the instruction and incorporate it while they're playing, and not think, oh, I need to stop what I'm doing and then turn and really focus on the adult and what they're saying and then go back to what I'm doing in play. So you can see it develops over time. It's developmental. We're not expecting it to suddenly happen. It happens over time. But what we do know is that the things that we do within our interaction are the things that can support children's listening and attention. So roughly speaking, it's a kind of a minute for every year of life. So, a 2-year-old, we're only expecting them to kind of sit for 2 minutes, a 3-year-old for 3 minutes, a 4-year-old for 4 minutes. But we can extend that with the strategies that we use in our own interaction to make things exciting, to make things attention grabbing, and to encourage children to develop their listening and attention skills. We're going to have a look at some interaction strategies following the words up early key messages that can be used across the play and learning environment, within routines and within group situations to support listening and attention development. We know that adult interaction is really crucial for supporting children's language and communication development, and listening and attention is part of language and communication. So we know that that interaction is really crucial. The first key message that we're going to focus on is pausing and waiting. When we talk about pausing and waiting, we talk about having almost a count of up to 10 seconds in our head while we watch and wait children. and it gives them time to think about and process any language or communication or interaction that they're seeing and hearing. But we also talk about having a pause and wait to let children start the interaction. And when we do that, what it does is it lets children take the lead, it lets us see what they want to do and where their focus of interest is. And when we initially were talking about what helps us to listen, we said when we're interested, when we are, listening to something that we're interested in, it helps us to listen. It helps us to pay attention because we have that focus of interest and we want to attend to something that we're interested in. And it's absolutely the same for children. So if we pause and wait and we watch to see what they're interested in first, and we follow their interest and their focus of interest, then they're going to be able to attend much more easily than if we say, let's go and do this. So within play, we follow their lead, their attention is going to be focused for a longer period of time. And it's about letting go a little bit of what we think the play should be. Particularly those of us who've got children, we know that we wrap up something beautiful for Christmas, and we've got this idea of how it's going to be played with, and then we have our child playing much longer with the wrapping paper or the cardboard box. Or I can remember with my wee ones having a train that all the bricks went together in a certain way to make a train. I don't think after it came out of the box it was ever put together in that same way, but we played with the bricks for hours on end, but it just never ever got put back together into this beautiful train that it was meant to be. But it was about following that lead and having fun in the way that it was played with. The other thing we do when we pause and wait is we're modeling listening and play. So it's a pause and a wait, and it's about waiting expectantly. So it's not just a pause saying, well, I'm just going to just sit back and let you have your turn. We talk about waiting expectantly and knowing the children's communication. So thinking about, I know you, I know your level of communication, I know what I'm expecting from you. Whatever that is, it might be lots of language, it might be a point, it might be a smile, it might be a giggle, it might be that they move their arm, whatever that communication is, you're waiting expectantly. And when you do that, you're modeling listening. So you're smiling, you're looking, you're leaning into the play, you're doing all of those things, and that's modeling really good listening. And children learn from the adults around them when they model the skills that we want them to use. Um, so it's really good to model the things that we want them to be doing. The next key message that we're going to talk about in relation to attention and listening and supporting attention and listening is the play and talk together key message. So to recap that key message, in essence, it's about vocabulary and language learning, and it talks about how we support and how children learn language. And what we know is that children need three things to learn language. What they need is to have experience, and they need an adult to be there alongside that experience and to repeat the words. They need the adult to repeat the words alongside that experience. So that's how children learn language and communication. And for play and talk together, the reason it's so key for attention and listening is that children need to have language that they understand. They need to have language that matches their interest and experience in order for them to focus on that language. We talked at the beginning about what helps us to listen, and we talked about how we needed to be interested in the topic, but we also need language that we understand. It's so easy to switch off when we hear language that we're not understanding. If I went into a lecture theatre and it was a topic that was really difficult for me to understand, maybe a topic about, I don't know, quantum physics or something really tricky, and I started hearing, lots of words that I didn't understand, I think I would switch off really quickly and I would be wanting to look out the window and see what was happening outside and start daydreaming about all the other things I could be doing. Um, and it's the same, absolutely the same for children. If they hear language that's too complex, and too tricky for them to understand, they will lose interest. And so it's really important that we match our language to the children's language. And it's really important that we plan our vocabulary and really think about what vocabulary we're using for children and what, the repetition so that we're supporting vocabulary learning. And also keep that interest. The interest is really, really key. Um, I definitely lose interest if I'm trying to listen to something that's on that I'm not interested in, and I lose interest if something's on the radio and the radio is on in the car when I'm driving and something a program comes on and I'm not paying attention. I find it really hard to tell you what that's been about if it's something that hasn't grabbed my attention. So that vocabulary is really key to supporting attention and listening skills and helping children to tune in. Children will tune in to language and to the adult using that language when it meets their interest and it meets their language level. The key message, quiet time to talk, really fits when we're talking about distractions because it doesn't just talk about finding a quiet time. We are also talking about the visual distractions and the internal distractions. And it's really easy to think about them in terms of how it impacts on our own listening and attention. So we can really relate that to children's listening and attention. And I think when we're thinking about these distractions, both the noise, all of both the noise and the visual distractions, what we need to be thinking about is not just what impacts on our own listening and attention, but also those other noises and that other visual things that we can see, because sometimes it's clear that what affects us might not affect other people, and also what doesn't affect us might affect other people. So that idea of you could be working away in your office and hear a noise and not pay any blind bit of attention to it until somebody else comes in and says, how do you work with that noise? And I think that's really clear for children, that sometimes noises will affect different children in different ways. And so it's a being aware and taking a bit of time to kind of be aware of what noises are around in the environment and just thinking, just having some time to be aware of what's around and the visual things of what's around. And children are not masters of their own environments at all. And they will try, some children will try to be masters of their own environment and vote with their feet, but generally they can't create their own environments and they're reliant on the adults to creating the environments for them. So when we're thinking about creating an environment for listening, sometimes it's about tweaking that environment and sometimes it's thinking, okay, nurseries and schools and actually sometimes places at home are generally busy, noisy environments. They are. We have lots of toys and we have lots of things going on, and most of the time that's great, but sometimes we want somebody to have somewhere that they can have time to listen, just time to really tune into that language. Remember, we were saying on the last slide that I was talking about, they need to tune in to the words, to really pay attention to those words and to listen and tune in and have that interest. So sometimes we need to just think about how do we create that environment. Maybe we go to a different room. Maybe we go to a different space. Is that outside? Do we have listening time outside? Do we have it in away from those distractions? Just thinking about where that space is going to be. And I guess when we're thinking about internal distractions, it's just bearing in mind how that can impact on us and thinking about we might never know what those internal distractions are for some children, but bearing in mind that there will be for some children, there will be things buzzing around in their minds that they can't switch off, and they may have those internal distractions. And it might explain why there are some days where children who are maybe really good listeners, but there may be days when they're not so good at listening, or there may be days where they have up days and down days, and just bearing in mind that it may be about those internal distractions that we're not seeing and they're not able to explain to us yet or don't want to. Being face to face is key message for attention and listening, because being in a face-to-face position enables children to look at the person who's talking, and that gives so much more information than just hearing the words alone. They can see facial expression, they can see body language, and it's just really vital for attention and listening skills and lots of other skills in communication. What's really important to think about is to get down to their level and making sure that children can see you when you're in any form of interaction and communication, but really key when you're wanting children to listen and pay attention. When we're thinking about in group times, it can be particularly tricky. So one of the things that we think about is, how are we gathering children into a group? Are we thinking about, when we call them, they all kind of want to gather around, and it can be really tricky, and you get that whole kind of pile up almost of, as they try to gather near and see, particularly if you've got a story or you're holding up something that you want them to see, they're all kind of trying to get near. And you get that whole kind of thing of, I can't see, and I can't see you, and I can't see the book, and so-and-so's in the way, and it leads to all kinds of shenanigans on the nursery floor or in the classroom. One of the things that we found quite helpful is to think about sitting children in a circle or a semicircle. That way, if they're in that kind of position, they're all in a space where they can see you. So if you're sitting down at their level, they're all in a place where they can actually see you if they're in a circle or a semicircle. Obviously, children don't know what a circle or a semicircle is, so it's really hard to kind of just say to them, can you get in a circle or a semicircle? So some of the things we found helpful for that is either kind of getting them to sit around the edge of a mat, or a really large carpety mat, or actually, if you're in the same place for listening times like story and circle time, is to have that marked out on the floor with a bit of carpet tape. The carpet tape is quite good because it doesn't peel up off the floor easily, so it's not easily to pick at and be a distraction. And children will then be able to kind of know where to sit, because they can just sit on the tape. And the other way is to get children to hold hands and kind of form that shape, all holding hands, and then to sit down, and obviously then drop hands. And that enables children then to be able to see where you are and to kind of have that position where they can see, and they don't have children in front of them. So obviously, if you've got a child sitting in front of you and you're a wee one and you've got somebody sitting in front of you, there's that danger that they're too big and they're in the way, but also it's a visual distraction, and it's so easy to be able to want to kind of prod and poke when you've got somebody that's near you. The advantage of being in a circle or semicircle is you've just got the person either side of you, and it's easier to kind of maintain that distance and maintain that kind of not having a distraction in front of you when you're trying to see. And being able to see is a really vital part of kind of having attention and listening and skills, and developing attention and listening skills. One of the things with that, if you're thinking, wow, I've got lots of children and a circle would be really big, where am I going to find the space to do that? Is actually thinking about the size of your group. And having that, the size of the group is really important to have a think about in terms of listening and attention as well. When we're thinking about the idea of children being engaged in the activity, we talked about that interest being key for attention and listening, and being part of it and having interaction as part of the activity is really important for attention listening. If I'm taking a part in something, then I'm generally going to be much more engaged and want to pay attention, rather than just being a passive person listening. So being engaged is really key. So that's much easier if I'm in a smaller group. So one, it's easier to see because there's less children and it's easier to form that small circle or semicircle. It's much easier to be engaged in something and take a turn, and I don't have to wait as long to take a turn if I'm in a smaller group. It's actually much easier as the adult taking a small interactive group if it's slightly smaller, because I can think about the level of language, I can think about how I tailor my language and my input for that group. So when we talked about that play and talk together key message and thinking about the level of language that I use, it's much easier in a smaller group to be able to do that and to think about the type of language or the type of input that I'm doing in that group and the type of kind of teaching aspect that I'm doing if it's in a small group as well. We've talked about all of the interaction style strategies to support attention and listening. And on top of that, we're now going to talk about using visuals and props. And we're talking about them in a kind of a show and a tell. And the reason for that is that whenever we use a visual, and a visual can be a gesture, a picture, or an object. And when we think about that, a gesture can be pointing or showing somebody something. A picture could be a photograph or a drawing or a symbol. So we've got gestures, pictures, or objects. When we show, we always tell. And we tell using nice, simple language. So they go hand in hand. We can't have a show without a tell. We must do them together. But we're going to think about how do we show and tell, how do we use visuals to support listening and attention alongside all of our nice interaction strategies that are going to support attention and listening too. So I'm just going to pose the question to you and have a little think, and I'll pause for a bit. Just have a think, how do I describe what is listening? I'm wondering if you came up with a few things around it's hearing, it's processing language, it's thinking about the words that people say. I think it's a really tricky thing to describe. I think it's even trickier when we think about describing what listening is to young children at preschool or early primary level. And I think when we're thinking that, it's really hard to then imagine how are we going to tell children to listen, or even say to them, you're not listening, or I want you to listen, or now it's time to listen. So one of the advantages of using some visuals to support listening skills is that it helps us to make it a little bit more concrete and a little bit more visual and solid for them around what listening is. So we need to think about what's a concrete way to describe listening to children. And that enables us then to describe it to them, and it enables us then to really praise some really nice listening skills that we see in children and start to model that and praise it for them. So what we talk about for young children is when we use these visuals, we talk about this, we say we want to see good listening, but that in itself doesn't explain it. So we say this is good listening, we want to see good listening. And in young children, we talk about good listening being, we say it's good looking. So when we say good looking, what we're looking at, we say is, I can see you looking at the person who's talking. So I might say, oh, I can see you looking at the person who's talking, Johnny. That's really good listening. And we talk about looking at the person who's talking. We don't say look at me, because we want to make it really clear and really concrete. So if I said I was reading the story and I said, oh, I can see you looking at me, I don't want him to look at me. I want him to look at the person who's talking, because it might not be me next time. So we have this one of you're doing really good looking, you're looking at the person who's talking. That means you're doing good listening. But we also have this where we talk about good sitting. So we either have the picture of good sitting, where we have sitting on the floor, or we have good sitting on chairs. What we mean by good sitting, we're not expecting children to be sitting rigidly like this on a chair with their feet on the floor and their bottoms on the chair and their hands by their side or in their lap, or we're not expecting them to be sitting on the floor with their legs crossed rigidly like this. What we mean by good sitting, and we mean that they're sitting in their own space, they're not fidgeting with the person next door to them. They may be fidgeting a little bit. When I've been sitting doing this video, been fidgeting myself with a hairband, because I'm a fidgeter, and it doesn't stop me listening. And I am a doodler. It doesn't stop me listening. That's me. I do those things and it helps me to listen. So what we were looking for is that they're sitting in their own space, they're not bothering other people, they're not just getting up and wandering off. That's what we mean by good sitting. So what we are saying to children is, if you're doing good sitting and you're doing good looking at the person who's talking, that means that you're doing good listening. Later on, when children get a bit older, we might talk a little bit more about and add in some other skills, like you're doing good thinking, which means you're thinking about the words that you're hearing. But at this stage, at this early stage, we would just keep it to those two things and keep it nice and simple. So we've got simple language, concrete descriptions of listening, and that really concrete praise then that we can give them. The last thing that we might use visuals for is to use maybe a visual timeline to tell them with the routine. Remember when we said it's really nice to know when we're going to listen, we're nice to be prepared that we're going to listen, nice to know how long it's going to last. So we might say, it's time to listen now. So it's time to put the toys away, it's time to listen, or it's time for story, or, we're going to listen to have a story and then it's going to be break. Those kind of things. It might be nice to use a visual timeline for that. And you can find out more about that by looking at the information on visual timetables and visual timelines on the Bumps to Burns website or on the High Net Literacy website. But what you might do with that is just to give them that signal and just to tell them that it is going to be time to listen, and let them know that that's happening, or let them know that that's going to happen and then what's going to happen next. So first we're going to do this and then we're going to go to break. Or first we're going to have a story and then we're going to have snack. So it helps children to know, okay, we've got this happening now and then we're going to go and do that. And that helps children to be prepared for what's happening and prepared for how long that's going to be. We've had a look at the strategies that we can use to support children's listening and attention. So in summary, there's the interaction strategies following the words up early key messages. And then there's the using the visual supports, that idea of showing and telling at the same time, thinking about giving concrete information about what listening and attention is, and also giving concrete praise along those lines too. And we can think about supporting listening and attention in play and interaction. And then if you're in a nursery setting or a school setting, we can also think about how we support listening and attention within routines and groups as well. And if you're in a nursery or an education setting, you can think about, there's a wee checklist, there's a link at the bottom under the video, and you can download that and you can just print it off, and it's something you might want to use in your planning, but it gives you an idea to think about within each of those settings, within kind of play and interaction, within routines and within groups, where you can look at just a wee checklist of what kind of strategies would I be thinking about in each of those three types of settings. In addition, if you want to kind of look at those key messages in any more details, you could have a look at the Words Up Early key message videos for each of those key messages individually. Thank you for watching this video on supporting attention and listening skills in the early years. Remember that if you have any queries about the development or well-being of a child, you can phone the Just Ask inquiry line for further information.